Thank you, Member. The Member for Warren Blackwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I also rise to support this motion. So fuel security is a direct and immediate threat to food security in this state, and increasingly to the way regional communities live day to day. From planning to growing to harvesting to storing and ultimately to moving produce through our freight networks to market, every step depends on reliable access to diesel. If farmers cannot access fuel, they cannot plant their crops, sustain them, harvest them or get them to market. When that happens, it stops being a farming issue and becomes a problem for every household in Western Australia. But, Mr Speaker, while this is a whole-of-state issue, it is not felt equally. In the city, fuel is often a background cost. In the region, it is a daily constraint. Regional people travel further, more often, for the basics of life. A trip to the doctor is not just a 10-minute down the road. It can be up to 2 to 4 hours round trip. Getting children to school activities can mean hundreds of kilometres each week. Accessing banking, aged care or specialist services often require leaving town altogether. These are not optional trips, they are essential. And when fuel prices double, as we've seen diesel rise from $1.70 to over $3.45 per litre in regional areas, this burden falls on these regional communities. What is particularly frustrating for the regional West Australians is that many of these pressures are not new. These are issues that have been raised time and time again around distance, cost of living, service access and the true cost of delivering and receiving services in the regions. But it takes a global shock, a disruption to fuel supply chains, a spike in international prices for the full impact to be recognised. And when that shock comes, it does not land evenly. It hits the regional West Australians harder, faster and with fewer alternatives, because there is no public transport fallback. There is no nearby service to switch to and there is no way to reduce distance. We are already seeing the consequences across the agricultural sector. Farmers who have done everything right are now facing the prospects of losing entire seasons of work, not because of drought or flood, but because they cannot access fuel when they need it. Horticulture makes this even more acute. These are perishable products with narrow harvest windows, and if that window is missed, the crop is not delayed, it is lost. Potato growers invest up to 22 weeks, nearly 6 months into growing a single crop. Orchardists invest 12 months for one harvest opportunity. Without fuel at that critical moment, that entire investment is wasted. That means less supply, higher prices and greater reliance on food imports. So, Mr Speaker, the pressure is not confined to farms. Feedback from the Denmark Chamber of Commerce shows businesses across tourism, construction, freight, health and local services are already feeling the impact. They are seeing cancelled bookings, rising costs, reduced services and in some cases considering closure. Hiring has slowed and training has paused. Some businesses are reducing services and others are considering closure. And one business has reported more than $44,000 in lost revenue in under a month due to cancellations alone. Wow. And some are operating at a loss just to stay open, hoping that this will end. Again, these are pressures that existed before, but fuel volatility is amplifying them. It also extends to how people move between communities. Regional flights are not a luxury, they are a lifeline. They allow patients to access specialist care. They connect families, they support volunteers and emergency personnel. When fuel costs rise, airfares increase, services reduce and regional people are priced out. At the same time, the support mechanisms in place are not keeping up. The Patients Assisted Travel Scheme does not adequately reflect the true cost of long-distance regional travel. Pensioners, many on fixed incomes, are absorbing rising fuel costs without sufficient support. A one-size-fits-all approach does not work when distances are fundamentally different. Mr Speaker, within our shadow portfolios, there is another serious consequence that cannot be ignored. Aged care in regional WA is delivered on the road. Carers travel long distances between clients, often across multiple towns in a single day, but the funding models they operate under have not kept pace with reality. Travel reimbursements are often fixed, caps, or based on the ATO cents per kilometre rate, and that rate does not reflect the current fuel prices, vehicle wear and tear on regional roads, and the sheer distances required to deliver care. This was already a pressure point in the system. Fuel instability is now turning it into a breaking point, and service providers are being forced to absorb rising costs, reduce services, or stretch an already thin workforce. And that leads to fewer visits, longer wait times, and reduced access to care for vulnerable residents. And in some cases, providers are having to make decisions about whether they can continue servicing certain areas at all. Mr Speaker, if fuel insecurity continues, it will not just disrupt agriculture and business, it will undermine the delivery of aged care across regional West Australia. That is the real-world consequence of policy settings that have not kept pace with regional reality. And at the same time, farmers are dealing with rising input costs across the board. Fertiliser prices such as urea have surged from around $900 a tonne to $1,800 per tonne, and that's if you can get it at all. Freight companies are applying fuel levies of up to 60%, some as high as 67% on farmers' invoices, and growers cannot pass these costs on. They're price takers. And there comes a point when numbers simply do not add up for the farmer to continue to grow their crops. So for an example, like there's fertiliser companies now that are no longer taking on new clients, they're not taking orders from existing clients, and that's just putting huge uncertainty in the horticulture sector about what they can plant. So when you've got the increased freight costs of, to get say 12 cauliflowers to Perth from the Manjimup region, we're looking around $3 for a crate to transport them. Now you're looking at 67% plus the increase in cost, which has gone up about 50%. So it just becomes unviable.
And who's going to pay that?
Well, the farmer pays it, because at the moment, before the fuel price increase, it was about $1.67 a head for cauliflower in cost for the grower, and they've been getting about $1.50 to $2. So there's farmers that are now telling me, well, we're not going to be planting any sort of horticultural crops next year unless this is addressed. And that's the reality of where we're at and what we're facing. So the industry needs certainty of supply around fertiliser and fuel. The government must move with urgency to strengthen domestic fuel capacity and reduce reliance on vulnerable external supply chains. It must also properly consider the biofuels and renewable alternatives as part of a diversified and resilient energy mix. We cannot afford to leave any stone unturned. So in closing, the ask is clear. Prioritise diesel access for food producers, emergency services and essential regional businesses. Ensure independent distributors have the supply needed to service regional communities. Strengthen the patient assistant travel scheme to reflect real distance and fuel costs, and deliver a meaningful income to the regional pensioners' travel card. And ensure regional flights remain accessible for patients, families and volunteers. We need to review and update the aged care travel reimbursement models so providers are not forced to absorb unsustainable fuel costs, and treat fertiliser supply with the same urgency as we're treating with fuel now. Because this is not just about fuel, it's about whether farmers can plant and harvest their crops. It's about whether regional businesses can keep their doors open. And it's about whether aged care services can reach the people who depend on them. And ultimately, it's about whether West Australians, no matter where they live, can rely on a secure, functioning system that supports them. If we get this right, we strengthen our regions and our state. If we get it wrong, the consequences will be felt in every household across Western Australia.